Okay, President Marvel, we're live.
Thank you. All right, we're currently live for our June 29th special board meeting. Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education meeting. We want to let the public know that we are live streaming this meeting. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording has been posted to the district's website. I'd like to introduce my fellow board members. Rachel Hurd, if you'll raise your hand. Mark Jewett is our vice president. There we go. Ken Mintz and Susanna Ordway is our clerk. And then I'm Greg Marvel, I'm president of the board. So it's time for our Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll join me in our virtual Pledge of Allegiance, I would appreciate it. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, a report of action taken in closed session. There were no actions taken in closed session. So we're on to open session agenda. 7.1, consideration of adoption of resolution 94/1920, elimination and or reduction of classified positions. We're first going to have a report on public comments we may have received from Rick Schmidt.
Thank you, President Marvel. We had 0 public comments on non-agendized topics. We received 3 comments on 7.1, the action item on classified layoffs with questions and concerns. We received 27 public comments on our second action item, the resolution denouncing racism. Of those 27 comments, 26 were in support of the resolution, 1 was opposed. In our new virtual board meeting environment, rather than read those public comments on agendized items, we will post them to our district website in their entirety for the public to view. And all of our prior meetings, those comments, all of them are posted for the public to view.
Thank you. And as we've said at other meetings, I think it bears repeating, the board gets all those comments and we have read them all before we have our discussion and our votes on these issues. Okay, we're on to the elimination 94/1920, elimination and or reduction of classified positions. Mr. Rodzinski.
Thank you, President Marvel, and good morning, members of the board. Item 7.1 presents to you consideration of adoption of resolution number 94 for the 2019-2020 school year, which pertains to the elimination or reduction of classified positions. As the board is aware, the district uses a variety of sources, including base revenues, which are allocated to the district through the local control funding formula from the state, as well as what we refer to as external sources. Those are funds that are generated through the San Ramon Valley Education Foundation, its school-based affiliates, parent teachers associations, booster groups, including academic and athletic boosters, and other miscellaneous locally generated donations to fund basic services as well as supplemental services. And those are certificated as well as classified employee services to support student learning. We all know that the economic impact of COVID-19 on the international, national, and state economy this spring has compromised the financial stability of the district heading into the 2020-21 school year. The pandemic has also compromised the ability of some of our school-based groups to raise external funds that are frequently used to enhance and enrich programs for students. That compromise took place this last spring in that several schools could not complete their end of year fundraisers, which typically take place in the form of galas and end-of-year fundraising celebrations. And that was from basically March 13th, the time that school closed down, and the shelter in place was put into effect up through the end of the school year. Because of that, the district met with school administrators and school affiliate group leaders in early June to ask them to re-examine the funding commitments that they had submitted to us in February to staff supplemental employee services for next year, including classified services. And we asked them to determine whether existing external funds and the reserves available could support those commitments. And if not, or if there were any question about that, to revise those commitments where necessary if those existing funds could not support them. Those revised commitments were submitted to the Human Resources Office by all school sites by the second Friday of June, which I believe was June 12th. And those revised commitments significantly reduced staffing needs for those supplemental employee services, including classified services for next school year. In addition, because of uncertainty around the manner in which school is set to reopen and what the reopening of school will look like starting August 11th, there was a request to significantly reduce the number of elementary and middle school noon duty personnel for next school year. Based upon all of those funding commitments, there's a need to reduce classified employee services for the 2020-21 school year. The resolution presented to you today basically acknowledges and identifies the impact in terms of where and what specific classified service reductions will be needed based upon those revised commitments. Under the education code, the district may lay off classified employees due to lack of work or lack of funds. Upon approval of the attached resolution this morning and completion of our negotiations with CSEA, which are ongoing and pending as of this meeting, affected employees will receive written notification of layoff and will also be informed of any reemployment rights they may have subsequent to that layoff. Layoffs under the education code become effective no less than 60 calendar days from receipt of the notice of layoff. The resolution presented to you this morning, resolution 94-1920, is presented to you for recommended approval. Thank you.
Okay, are there any comments or questions? Ken?
Yeah, I'm going to support this resolution. However, I did want to make a couple of quick comments first. Specifically, you know, we're talking about supplemental positions here. However, you know, it's something that we've had to do over the course of time in our district, is rely upon these local external funds in order to provide services to our students and our staff. You know, we've said over and over how, you know, we're one of the lowest funded school districts in the state in terms of the funds that we receive from the state funds. What that means is we've had to depend more and more upon these locally generated funds in order to do what our school sites would like to see. And that's created two different issues. One is we've come to have to depend upon these fundraisers. And as mentioned earlier from Rachel in our closed session, you know, there's also inequity issues where some schools are able to raise funds and others aren't able to at that same level. So where some are able to provide these supplemental positions, others are not, just simply because their school area is not able to do the same level of fundraising. You know, I hold the state responsible for putting us in this position. I've heard, unfortunately, more than once where decisions are made thinking that school districts like ours that are in more socioeconomically well-to-do communities don't need the same level of funds as others. And that you can depend upon your community to raise funds to make up the difference that other communities don't have. I appreciate how hard it is in other communities to really provide services to their students. However, it puts us in a very untenable position of having to rely upon our community to raise these kind of funds. Let me just say, I really do appreciate our community and the way that they support our education. The fundraising is incredibly important, and our community recognizes that, and we really depend upon them in many ways to provide the level of service that we do. It's unfortunate that we have to take these kind of positions in this environment. However, like I say, I think there's some changes that are needed at the state level to ensure that basic funding, like we receive in our district, is able to provide the level of support that we need going forward.
Okay, Ken. All right, so anybody else? Mark.
I'll just say, it's personal for me. As many of you know, my wife, Nikki, has been deeply involved at the local ed fund for many, many years, over a decade now. So we know firsthand how important these funds are and the positions that they fund are to our local schools. And it's actually a little bit emotional to think that we're going to be scaling back in this kind of dramatic fashion right now with that knowledge of these particular positions. It's not a happy time by any means. It's just the environment that we're in, closing schools, closing and having dramatically lost opportunities to fundraise over the spring. And we don't know what that's going to look like coming in the fall. So we had to course calibrate, and the local affiliates had to course calibrate and course correct on what we could reasonably anticipate funding. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands this is not the district going to extraordinary lengths to cut positions because of budgetary constraints. This is really, I believe, the direct result of a pandemic. Nobody saw it coming, and it's creating some real hardships. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we get some budgetary relief. Maybe we can bring some of these positions back in the near future. And I'd like to hear some comments around that from Keith as well. But to just let you know, this one is very, very difficult.
Susanna, you had your hand raised.
Yeah. Like Mark, this one is really personal to me too, because I was one of the classroom paraeducators, and I was an instructional assistant on school site. So I understand this is really difficult. And you know, a personal, this has been very difficult for me because I understand the great support that our classified employees and our employee groups, right, have given us, how they've supported teachers, how they've supported parents and students. But I had to kind of remove myself from the personal position because, again, these are supplemental funds. These are external funded positions. And so I try and equate it to like my household. If my household budget is already, you know, in the negatives because we have a deficit, do I pay to have extra piano lessons for my children or other external support? Probably can't. So, you know, again, very difficult, but I think that this is, you know, in order to support district as a whole, yeah, this will have to, I have to support this move, but again, very personal, and what it's, I'm taking in comfort that as we go along, and as we know what happens with regards to, you know, fundraising, as well as what the district models will need, maybe we can bring some of these positions back.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, then I am going to support this resolution reluctantly. And I think I was never a para in a classroom in this district, but I understand the valuable nature of the positions that are funded by our ed foundations and their affiliates. It helps, as Ken had commented, it helps to fill the gap that we have with the current formula from the state. I think that it's going to be very difficult in the next 2 to 3 years, at least, probably, to have the state take the funding gap that we have seriously. I think they've got bigger issues, frankly, when you're losing 54 billion in tax revenue. I think that there's going to be a whole issue that has to get resolved about how you get the budget back into some sort of a balance at the state level, because we are financial wards of the state. When they get the flu, we get a pneumonia. That's the reality of what we're having to deal with right now. So the ed foundations and their affiliates have created an invaluable resource for years that have helped us to kind of fill that gap. What other districts are able to provide service-wise in the classroom and at the schools from their revenue they get from the state, we don't have that ability. And our parents' community, through their various affiliate groups and the foundations, have stepped up to help fill that gap somewhat. And they've done a marvelous job. And it's a tragedy that we have to have this discussion. We also have to recognize that if we don't take this action today, that we are going to be, as a general fund, we're going to be on the hook for the costs of those employees until they ultimately are laid off. The reality is that by law, we're required to give 60 days notice. If we don't provide that notice today, it doesn't mean it's ultimately going to get implemented. In other words, this is a notice. This isn't a final, you're gone as of today. There'll be further discussions. The affiliates will, now that we're going back full time, we hope 5 days a week, assuming the county doesn't change their guidelines, assuming we are going back, I think the calculation of what the ed foundations and their affiliates think they can get in donations, I think that potentially could change. And so the numbers could potentially change, and they might be able to fund positions that they had determined they couldn't. Also, somebody had indicated to me that we were requiring the affiliates to provide all that money and the commitment up front. And that has now changed. We went back to the groups and we said you can make payments. In effect, you can make 2 payments if you want. So you don't have to pay it all up front. So I just want people to understand, because I got some emails about that we've made that offer, and some of our groups took advantage of that offer. So it's somewhat of a good faith bet, if you will, on the general funds part, that the affiliates are going to be able to come through with their fundraising to be able to cover. Because the way it works, for those people who don't understand, we pay the money, we pay the salaries of these positions, and then we get reimbursed from our affiliate groups, our ed foundations and our affiliate groups. If that money doesn't come through, then the general fund is on the hook. And we have, we don't have the money to cover millions of dollars of unfunded, externally funded positions that we now suddenly have to come up with general fund money to pay. So people need to understand why we're doing it. It's not because we don't see the value of the positions. We don't honor the commitment that those employees have made. It's that what it comes down to is our affiliates have told us, looking at what they have available to them, what positions they feel comfortable in funding for the coming year. And so those discussions will be ongoing, and those numbers could change. That we could end up with fewer number of positions, but we have to identify them now so that the legal process of layoff can then be initiated. But we've got 60 days before anything is finalized. So we got some time. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I need a motion from somebody.
Move approval.
Okay, I have a motion from Mark. Do I have a second? Somebody needs to second. All right, Rachel, we have a second from Rachel. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, reluctantly. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, this then authorizes staff to begin the process of notifications and then continuing discussions with our employee organizations. All right, anything else before us today? I don't believe there is.
7.2.
Oh, I'm sorry, 7.2. There's my script. I apologize profusely. 7.2, let me read that. Hold on here. It's here somewhere. There we go. Consideration of adoption resolution 95/19-20, denouncing racism and supporting equity, safety, and well-being of Black people. And Susanna, would you like to read the resolution that's been presented to us by staff?
With pleasure. Okay. Whereas the San Ramon Valley Unified School District desires to provide a physically and emotionally safe school environment that allows all students equal access and opportunities in the district's academic and other educational support system programs, services, and activities. The Board of Education prohibits discrimination, including discriminatory, harassment, intimidation, and/or bullying of any student based on actual or perceived characteristics of race or ethnicity, color, nationality, national origin, immigration status, ethnic group identification group, ethnic group identification, age, religion, physical or mental disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, gender expression, or any other characteristic identified in Education Code 200 or 220, Penal Code 422.55, or Government Code 11135, or based on association with a person or group with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics. Whereas we value and teach equity, diversity, and inclusion. The SRVUSD priorities and framework for excellence elevates goals of equity, and we actively teach our students conflict resolution to communicate their own feelings of injustice without prejudice and to the upstanders in their community. Whereas we believe that silence and inaction perpetuates injustice, bias, and racism. Whereas recent events in the United States remind us that hundreds of years of prejudices, injustices, and inequalities are embedded in our societies, from social structures to institutions to cultures to individuals. Decades of civil rights legislation and education have not obliterated racism, and its breadth has a negative impact on the safety, health, and well-being of Black individuals, families, and communities. Whereas it's been documented that COVID-19 pandemic has taken an inequitable and disproportionate physical, mental, and financial toll on Black and Brown communities. Whereas the systematic inequities in our nation have again been exposed, and our hearts are heavy as we witness the successions of killings of Black individuals by government entities that validates generations of Black voices expressing this overarching inability to protect themselves, their families, and communities. Whereas ensuing events derive from an accumulation of desperation in the Black community that reflects the hopelessness for equal access to constitutional protections and rights for themselves, their families, and communities. Whereas Black community members continue to report that they regularly experience microaggressions, racial profiling, hate instances, and racial bias in all systems they encounter, including our school district. Whereas we recognize that discrimination, bias, and racist incidents negatively affect the mental health and in return the academic outcomes of Black students. Whereas we recognize that there are employees and students who have felt harmed and who want the board to take immediate action. Whereas, despite a long record of extensive interventions to promote successful outcomes for all students, an equity gap still exists among SRVUSD students, most notably Black and Brown students. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the SRVUSD board stands firmly against bigotry, prejudice, discrimination, and inequity in all forms, both institutional and individual. As protests surge in local communities and beyond, the SRVUS board wishes to affirm its commitment to the well-being and safety of Black community members and let them know they're not alone. 1, SRVUSD denounces discrimination and racism against Black people. We will not tolerate racist treatment of any member of our community, and we will speak out against racism and systemic oppression in our society to help stop the spread of bigotry. 2, SRVUSD joins cities, counties, and states across the country in affirming its commitment to the safety and well-being of Black community members and in combating hate crimes and biases in our government systems. 3, SRVUSD will increase its effort to provide a safe and welcoming school environment for all students and staff, and will work with the city of San Ramon, town of Danville, and Alamo community. 4, SRVUSD will confront the biases in our own school district and actively engage in the challenging work of dismantling the problematic practices that are limiting the opportunities for our Black and Brown students. Pass and adopted. The following call vote this 29th day of June, 2020.
All right. Questions or comments from board members? Susanna.
Susanna, go first.
Okay, so as an Asian American, I have not been a stranger to racism, actions, and microaggressions on myself. I came here when I was 8 years old, so I've been through, you know, my some of my childhood, teen years, an adult, right? Young adult, and now an adult. And throughout, I've experienced different types of microaggressions, some racist incidences and stuff. But I've realized that I never, even with the instances and the racial microaggressions that I've experienced personally, I've never had to fear for my life on a daily basis, as our Black community members and our Black students may experience, especially from those that I guess the authorities that we expect would protect us. So I think that in this resolution, we want to make sure that we call out our denouncement of racism to our Black community and Black students, because it doesn't lessen the equity and our support for the other groups, but we want to make sure that this group is especially supported because of that the uniqueness, right? Unique danger that they feel. I commend the district for having, started some of the programs and the work and effort that's been done. I know that the district partnered with the San Ramon Valley Diversity Coalition and the Anti-Defamation League on programs. I commend the teachers in our community who have worked on some of the equity programs, including the culturally and linguistic learning that's done. And I commend our parent groups, PTA, and parents who supported financially, time, and effort in bringing programs to our community on equity work. But this has been going on for several years, as I remember. So I was really devastated to hear some of our Black students and Black community members at the Diversity Coalition meetings that they're still, I mean, and of course we need, you know, a couple of incidences on school sites, right, with racism. So I was devastated here. It's still going on, and even though we've been doing work on this, so I think we really do need to do more, and we should look at maybe some of our curriculum and just some of the way we've been doing things. We've had, you know, a lot of public comments, and some of those parents, teachers, students have great ideas. So I urge the district to please work closer with them and to make meaningful changes in this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Susanna. Appreciate it. Rachel, you had your hand up. Just
If anyone else would like to go first, they can.
okay. Anybody? Ken.
Yeah, just quick comment. I absolutely am in support of this resolution. I want to thank Susanna for bringing it forward. The one thing that I do want to say, though, is, you know, something that when I first ran for office, it was 8th grade. I remember getting up in front of my student body, and my opening comment was, action speaks louder than words. And we need to make sure that the resolution is not an endpoint or a checkoff for us as a board. This is only the beginning. Now, I say a beginning, but quite frankly, as Susanna mentioned, we have done quite a bit within our school community to try to affect change. I think the actions that we've seen, even locally, but nationally, the last couple of months here, recognizes, and again, hearing from through emails and different community voices, you know, even within our own community, these issues continue. It's important for us to use this resolution as the next step forward. And again, not just to check off to say, okay, we've joined everyone else in supporting through resolution. One of the things that we do as a board is in August time period, we approve resolutions for the year for various events that occur that are tied to education. One of those is approval in February of African American History Month. One of the things that I've asked for, and I want to see us continue to move forward on, is it's not enough for us just to put these resolutions forward. It's appropriate, it's important. However, I think just as important is a review after that resolution comes out of the actions that have actually been taken. You know, what is it that we're seeing happen in our classrooms? How have our actions and direction as a board turned into implementation? I think it's critically important that we know that, as well as our community knows, that we're not just stopping with the words, that we're working as hard as possible as a district to correct inequities, and very importantly, to have our students and staff members feel safe in our environment in whatever way that means. We do hear from our students, and it's an important voice that we need to continue to hear from as a barometer of how we are doing. And right now, what I'm hearing, as Susanna said, is voices in our community who still do not feel safe. Again, this resolution is a start, not a completion.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate some comments I made at the opening of the meeting. I think it was 2 meetings ago, and fully concur with Ken and Susanna's thoughts that we need to acknowledge that racism exists in our schools and in our community. We've heard it, we've seen it. We have the duty to be self-reflective and engage in those difficult conversations that address the impacts of racial and social injustice. We need to celebrate our diversity of background and our diversity of thought, and how we can all strive to be allies to each and every one of our underserved communities. We've made strides, as Suzanne and Ken have alluded to, but we can and we have to. There's no compromise here. We have to do better. 3 areas that I've been thinking about as I read through the public comments is, one, curriculum, and I'm gonna go back to what I still reference as one of the most articulate and well thought out emails that we received maybe a month ago or so from a former student from Doherty Valley High School advocating for diversity of content, diversity of authorship, and diversity of thought. It was in an English language arts, I believe, context, but I think that can permeate through all of our curriculum areas. Second is professional development. We've made great strides with CLR. And I think we need to continue that, not lose momentum, and figure out even deeper and more meaningful ways, bigger cohorts, whatever it is. Let's get together and have the discussion on how we can continue to root out biases. And the third thing, and this is something I've long been thinking about and long been advocating for, and it's my fault that I haven't actually pushed it forward, but likely going to try much more rigorously here, is how can we use our climate committee, empower the climate committee to be more responsible, empower them to have greater emphasis on accountability. How can the climate committee be more action focused and make recommendations to the district, work with the equity inclusion groups throughout the district, come before the board and give presentations on how we are addressing areas of social and racial injustices. It's something that I'd really like to have those discussions, maybe not right now, but as we think about moving into the fall. Those are 3 areas that I think we really need to focus in on.
Thank you, Mark. Rachel.
First, I'd like to thank Susanna for bringing this resolution forward now and pushing for it now. I also want to thank my fellow board members for their comments. I agree completely. I also want to thank the community that wrote to us about this item. There were several comments that requested specific actions that we include right now. And I want to respond to that. I am supportive of the things they suggested, but I don't think just jumping in with solutions is the right answer. We have been working in this area for a long time. Some people deep in the thick of it and others on the edges. And I think the thing that's really important for all of us to understand, and I'm not saying we need to go slow to go fast here in the sense of we're dragging our feet, but I think talking about race is very difficult for many people. I am so admiring our equity warriors, our equity leaders in our district who are, 2-3 years ahead of us, and how facilely they talk about it. I think we all need to get caught up. I don't mean their ideas have to wait while the rest of us catch up, but I think part of our plans need to include how do we bring other people along? What books do we need to read? What discussions do we have to have? We need to roll up our sleeves, and as folks like Angie Coratone and John Parks have said, we need to get into the thick of it and get dirty and get uncomfortable. And that's the big piece. We have to deal with that discomfort. And as far as how this issue right now is addressing our Black community, that's critical because right now they are hurting the most. And it's not that it's a competition about who's hurting the most or the least, but hearing from individuals in those communities and being exposed to the stories we're seeing on a national level, seeing what we're seeing in video footage, it's frightening, it's appalling, and it's real. And it's those visuals that have to move all of us to get uncomfortable and to talk about this stuff. So I, like Mark, hope that the climate committee can have a larger role, but I think we've got to have the conversations that are being driven by our equity folks first, because otherwise we can look like we're just doing stuff and we're checking boxes off. But hearing from the mouths of our Black Student Union students at all 4 high schools, it was truly appalling what some of these students deal with on a daily basis. I think part of what they deal with is coming from ignorance, from people assuming that it's okay to use certain words. Teachers maybe trying to be real and putting kids in the moment of a piece of literature, but maybe not understanding that using that word, even though it's in the literature, normalizes the use of the word and it has an unintended consequence. And so digging into what all of this means is critical. And I don't think adding some additional bullet points to our resolution is the answer, but I think we should take the spirit of those bullet points as part of a guide of where we go next. I can see the tenets in this resolution, the whereas is driving additional priorities in our superintendent's priorities that then trickle down into actions for everyone else in the district. And given that we're about to go into a transition there, I think it would be respectful for us to wait till John Malloy gets here before we're actually putting things in writing. But I want our community to know that I am committed, and I believe all 5 of us are committed to making this actions louder than words, because this is critically important. And I guess I'll stop there, but thank you.
Okay, yeah, we got about 3 minutes before Mark has to leave us. So I'm gonna speak quickly. Yes, I agree with the sentiments echoed by my fellow board members. But part of having a courageous conversation, because none of us on this board have any concept of what it likes to live in this country and frankly in this community as a person of color. None of us know it. You know, we can try to empathize, we can try to observe, we can try to listen to the comments, but at a visceral level, no, we've never experienced it. So we have to understand that that's the viewpoint that we're coming from, the lack of experience that we're coming from. It doesn't diminish our ability to do things, but it makes us have to think more thoughtfully about how we respond to the experiences that our families of color have, both in this country and in the Valley here in particular. I also want to point out that in having a conversation about race, with that courage has to come a responsibility that because somebody says something you disagree with, you can't automatically paint them with the R. The scarlet letter in today's world is the R, racist. Because you disagree with what somebody is saying doesn't mean that they're a racist. And people aren't going to have those courageous conversations. They're not going to speak up and speak from the heart and try to understand the other person's experiences if they agree with you 95% of what you're saying, but there's 5% they don't, and therefore they're immediately branded a racist. So that's what's going on nationally. It cannot be allowed to happen here. Racism isn't an issue of politics. It shouldn't be. It's an issue of doing what's right and wrong. And that's what so I'm in full accord of having an honest conversation about race and what we can do to make sure it doesn't happen here. I was talking to a Black parent last week, and I think this is very true. We as a board can't legislate what's in one's soul. We can't legislate attitude. We can legislate expectations and parameters and what we consider right and wrong and the consequences when you step over that line. We're never going to get rid of racism for all that are in the hearts of every single one of our kids. We have 32,000 kids. We work really hard to try to get them to understand what's right and wrong, and that racism is wrong, is fundamentally wrong. But ultimately, we're not going to get rid of 32,000. So I think from every single person in this valley, what we have to recognize is we need to think about how we make sure we send a consistent message to our families, to our kids going to our schools, particularly those of color, and to the kids who aren't of color that understand what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, and how you interact with your fellow students. That Black parent told me about the situation in which the N-word was used at his daughter's school, and restorative justice was implemented for part of that. So the teacher did the right thing, immediately said that's wrong, sent the offender to the office. Then within an hour or so, there was a restorative justice meeting to try to work out the relationship between those two, to get the child, the offender, to understand what he did was wrong, and to try to bring some sort of solace to the student who was impacted by that racial slur. He said something very telling to me, and I think we need to think about it. He said, all right, restorative justice may have helped the offender. What did it do for my daughter, who was deeply hurt, deeply upset, and deeply embarrassed by what that other student had said to her in class? And he said, maybe restorative justice isn't the right thing in all cases. So I think that's part of the courageous conversation. There are already some things we say, you do certain things, there is no restorative justice for that. You don't get a second chance. You'll get in the golf term, a mulligan, because you brought a gun to campus or a weapon of some sort. There are serious consequences. Maybe the use of racial slurs should be one of those things where you don't get a second chance. You don't get a mulligan. I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm saying there was a parent of color's perspective that where did his daughter get restorative justice? What helped her get through the pain and the suffering that this perpetrator had done to her? And I think that's a very valid point that we haven't thought about, and we need to. I know we're doing restorative justice in those incidents. Maybe restorative justice isn't the right answer. That's just one example. So I'm full supportive of the resolution. I think we need to have courageous conversations, and I want to give credit to Rick. Rick started some of those courageous conversations and some of the actions that we've done as a district. We need to step up the effort. We need to continue those discussions. All right, because I know Mark has to leave. Any other comments, questions? Calling for the question then. We need a motion first.
So moved.
Okay, Susanna moved. I need a second. Rachel did a second. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We've opened up a new door. Let's make sure that it isn't just a check mark that we've checked off the list and something definitive comes out of it. Thank you so much, everybody. Now I believe we have nothing. Rick, you have your hand up?
No, I was just thanking all of you
Oh, okay.
with my hand.
Okay. I believe, unless I've screwed up again, I believe we are now, this was the last thing to come before this board this morning. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you. This meeting is adjourned.